So, you've done your research, you've found a couple peer-reviewed sources, you're really proud of yourself. Now you're going to sit down and do some annotation. Read it and annotate it. And then you realize, holy butts, these peer-reviewed sources are so insanely difficult to read. I've got one that's 13 pages, I got another one that's 48 pages. What do I do? How do I read all of this? This is impossible! There are specific ways in reading a peer-reviewed source. And I'm going to talk to you about using some strategies that I developed in college, because nobody even told me what a peer-reviewed source was before I went to college, and trying to read them was impossible. So here are some strategies that I developed while in college, as well as confirmed at other colleges. Like I've talked with professors and writing instructors about this. So, do you need to read the whole article? Yeah, not really. I mean, there's going to be some elements of the article that are more relevant than others depending on what you're doing for research. And I'm going to talk to you about typically the most common parts of the article that are the best for you for your research. So each article is kind of separated into different sections. And these are different than the sections that I mentioned earlier that have like headings. There are going to be actual sections that you see in every different article. And actually, let me see if I can bring that up before I go through the presentation here. The different sections that you would see are things like this. So you'd see an article title, you'd see a journal name in the article itself, meaning like where it was published, not the article title, but the journal where the article is published. You're going to see an abstract. You're also going to see like typically the like what they researched. You're going to see a conclusion, you're going to see a works cited page, and you're going to see a title of publication. So there's multiple different sections that you would see. Some sections you might also see that talk about like literature review, meaning they've done some research on other research. So if I'm going to research panda bear habitat, a literature review means that I have done my own research on what other people have said about panda bear habitat. A discussion area is always going to be about what they've found, or what we can do with their research after they've done this research. Now what's going to be moving forward. There's going to be charts that are sometimes easy to follow, sometimes difficult to follow, and sometimes you can't use the chart by itself. You have to use the information that's surrounding it to understand it. The results are typically the results of the research. Oftentimes the results are not going to be as clear cut as you think. And meaning like it's probably better to look at the discussion or the conclusion to understand the results themselves, or like why the results are important. Methodology can be very, as this piece says, very technical. This is like the how. Oftentimes there are equations to understand the research that is quantitative, meaning like they're running numbers. And so oftentimes the methodology is not going to be relevant. You can skim through that probably. I would say 90% of the time you can skim through the methodology. So then how do you read the source? How do I read this? It's 27 pages. What do I do? What should I start with? What do I jump to? Should I go from beginning to end? I'm going to be honest, in college, I very rarely read an article from beginning to end. Once I learned how to read academic sources, I never read at the beginning and read all the way through. I actually jumped around to see what was most relevant. But I will say you always start with the title and the abstract. Remember that I told you that the abstract is a summary of what the article is about. So before you actually spend time reading a source, make sure the title seems relevant to your topic and the abstract. The abstract will typically tell you what the results of the research are, so you know what you're getting yourself into. If it does not seem like you can understand the abstract, don't use it. Don't use it. Don't even bother torturing yourself. So, and the other thing too is that, like, is it sufficient? Does it go enough? Does it have enough information for you, or does it go down the track that you are interested in knowing more about? So once you've figured out the title and the abstract, take a look at the intro. Read the introduction. That's it. Almost is always labeled as introduction, and that's going to be like the research question, or this is going to be the context or the exigence as to why this research was even done. So again, if I'm going to read it, if I'm going to write an article about panda bear habitat, the introduction might be me summarizing research that I had read and experiences that I have had understanding the destruction of the panda bear habitat. So they're going to cover the general understanding of like why they've done this research. So read the introduction. Then jump to the end. Okay, don't read the methodology, don't read the results yet, or don't read that. Read what I need you to do is read the conclusion. Okay, skim through the tables and figures, or excuse me, it says skim the results and conclusions. So just skim through them. All the technical stuff, skim it. Can you kind of get an understanding of what's going on there? You don't need to read that hardcore, unless you are in debate where you need to know methodology and how research is done. This is not going to be all that important unless you think the methodology, like if you are actually attacking a source for its lack of understandable research or lack of research in general. For example, I might, in my article, if I'm going to write something about a panda bear habitat, I might look at the methodology and how it's incorrectly assessing that panda bear habitat is not being destroyed. So I could say like, well, they only looked at this section of the forestry in southern China. They didn't actually look at all forestry in China that the panda bears live in. So, but this is kind of a digression. In general, just skim the results and the conclusion. What you do want to spend time looking at closely is the discussion. That's going to be, remember, like, what are we going to do with the results? What can we learn from the results of the research that have been done? So, what are the major findings? Are the results relevant? How are these relevant to you? How does this research relate to the field as a whole? The other thing that's really nice about this is that it will also tell you what other sources you can follow up with, or that what you can do further research with. Like they'll actually point you to other research. So definitely read the discussion to see what route they think people should continue to follow. So again, if I'm going to publish this article about panda bear habitat, my discussion would be about ways that we can conserve the habitat and other articles to read to actively conserve the habitat. Like I would make suggestions of like this researcher who is currently looking at ways that places in Thailand are preserving the habitat. So like I'm actually going to suggest other research, and that's going to be good for you. Look at the discussion. They will make suggestions for you and what to read. And then you can read the methodology. This is like when you actually think about like how many habitats did I look at in the research? How many people were interviewed? How many surveys were done? How long did I do this research? And so like that's where you actually get down to the nitty-gritty and the numbers of a particular piece of research. I will let you know that doing research with peer-reviewed sources can be complicated, and you should never feel as though you're bound to one peer review source. If you don't understand it, ditch it. Find another one. Like seriously, you don't have time to spend figuring out a source. Okay, and so there are plenty of academic sources, and I will post one more video where I just kind of show you how I would go about looking at a particular source and how to read it. Okay.